all the holes with a wax kind of substance, but the holes were designed to make it be a little more breakable. And what would happen is a guy would climb up in the rigging of a ship, he would light it. The powder wouldn't make the grenade explode, it would heat up the ceramic. And when they would then, from up on the rigging of the ship, they would throw this to the other ship and they would throw it at the powder hole. The idea was, once the ceramic's gotten hot, you break it in lots of little pieces and you can start lots of little fires. If you start a fire in the powder hole, you can blow up the ship. So the Marines' job was to shoot everybody out of the rigging so they would not have ships blown up. And it's because of these kinds of things. Well, as they get there, they then get into hand-to-hand combat as ships are locked up. And the Marines then issued a brand new piece of uniform. The brand new piece of uniform they issued were 3-inch leather collars because as they were in the midst of fighting, they were going up against things like this. This is an original Muslim sword from back in the Barbary Powers War. Okay, so this is an original. It's still very sharp, and I'll hand this around. But Marines were having to fight this, and even back then, Muslims like beheading people. And so the Marines issued leather collars to protect their heads and necks in the middle of battle, even to this day. Was anybody a Marine veteran?
No, leathernecks.
Right? One of their names is the Leathernecks, but even to this day, they are issued a leather collar. Now it's a white leather collar for their dress uniform. They don't wear it in battle anymore. It's not practical. But it goes back to the war against Muslim pirates in America, and this is part of that history, which also, one of the things that was done, the very
pass
first...
this around?
Oh, yeah, we can pass the sword around. Just it is, like,
sharp,
honest, guys, it's very, very sharp.
It is sharp.
And I have no idea what kind of hepatitis might be on there. I'm just like, let's be honest, I have no idea. So be very careful with it. This is the very first ever printing of a Quran in the English language in America. This was done during Jefferson's presidency by the largest publisher at the time. And the reason they did this, they actually have a little introduction in the front where they're explaining to the reader what they're going to read. Because the questions were out there. Why are we fighting a war against people that we've done nothing to ever? This doesn't make any sense to us. And so in this introduction to the reader, it's roughly a page and a half. But in the second page of this, it says, "Thou will wonder that such absurdities have infected the best part of the world, and will avouch that the knowledge of what is contained in this book will render that law contemptible." If we would just study what it says, we'd go, how is this taking over the most beautiful parts of the world? Because this is contemptible. Well, yeah, when there's more than 40 verses about the honor of killing other people and how it makes you a better person and you're assured eternity, and that's a contemptible thing. Well, this is printed for every American to read so we would understand why we were having a conflict, because it was a conflict, what John Adams said. It's not just an army, it's an ideology. But this is back when we believed that it would be good for every American to kind of have an idea of some of what that was. So there's a lot more here in this section, but we've already gone like 25 minutes in this section, so we're way over. Just turn your heads this direction. And if you're way in the back, I apologize. If you want to scoot up, there's a few things we're going to hand. Oh, and if you still have some of the stuff we were handing around, you can give it back to Jonathan, and he'll take care of it. So this is another fun little gun. This one is unique. So can you read what it says right here, or who that?
Show rifle.
But who is it?
Annie Oakley.
Annie Oakley. This was one of Annie Oakley's guns. She later in her life, as she was doing exhibitions, she would do the exhibition, and then they could do a raffle for a charity for the gun that she used. So this was a gun that she used and then raffled off. Now, Annie Oakley, one of the things that we will point out is what's silly about the way we teach history today is most people learn names, dates, or places and know almost no stories, right? We don't. In fact, when I'm working with kids, it's just a fun thing for me to do, to ask them, okay, so what story do you know about George Washington? I can do the same thing with adults, because it's the same reality applies. The number one story people know about George Washington is about a cherry tree, which is not even a true story. Now wait a second. If it's a fake story, it could have been an apple tree too. Maybe your teacher told it different, right? The point is, it never happened, but the story was created to help people know how honest, how much character he had, right? Because he was, well, why would you do this, Father? I cannot tell a lie. I chopped down the tree, right? Like, this was about his character. The problem is, the father of our nation has become so forgotten that nobody knows any of his stories. Well, this is what we try to do, is help tell some of the stories that are very much historically credentialed and accurate, right? We can point to all the sources, but they just aren't known anymore. Annie Oakley is one of the fun examples like that. Annie Oakley was born in Ohio back in the middle of the Civil War to a very poor farming family. Her father died when she was 6. But as she was growing up, father was a hunter. Father was even helping teach the kids how to live off the land. So Annie had seen her father hunt and trap. When she was 8 years old, her mom was in town working. Annie, in her own writing, says that she and her siblings were starving. Now, that could be an 8-year-old being dramatic, or it's very possible, right? At that time, no dad around, your poor country people, they could have been starving. She says they saw a rabbit hopping out in their yard, and her dad's gun was above the fireplace. So they went and got the gun, and she says, at that time, we didn't know how much powder to put in, so we just poured all the powder we had into the gun. They then went out, she said she rested it on a post. She said, and I just looked at the rabbit. She really hadn't shot a gun. This is the very first time she had shot a gun. So she said, I just looked at the rabbit down the barrel, and she said, I think it was one of the best shots I ever made because the bullet went in one ear and out the other, and the rabbit fell down dead. She said, now, the powder was so much that the gun jumped up and I think broke my nose, but from that moment, I don't think I made a better shot ever since then. Well, what she learned is that hunting could provide food and meat for the family. So she did begin this endeavor, and by the time she was 15, she was a very well-known shot, but also she was well-known because she would shoot not just enough meat for her family, but she would then begin selling the meat to local towns. Even Cincinnati, which was miles and miles away, the biggest hotel in Cincinnati was buying the meat from her. By the time she was 15, she had paid off the family farm mortgage just by selling wild game, which I think, like, this is a new dream for me with kids, right? Like, I'm going to give them a vision. You can pay off our mortgage. You can do it, right? But she then has a name for herself. There was a sharpshooter when she was 16, Frank Butler, comes to town, Cincinnati, and he challenges all comers. Well, the local hotel owner says, I would like to make a little wager. I know somebody who's a good shot. I think they can outshoot you. They made what was called a friendly wager. In today's money, it was $250 back then. In today's money, it was thousands upon thousands of dollars. Okay, so I don't have the kind of money to call that a friendly wager, right? That's a big deal. But they made the wager. She won. He got so impressed. He said, I want to continue this conversation. So they begin writing. They begin courting. They end up getting married. Well, she travels with Frank, and she grew up in a Quaker family. She was always very religious, was a believer in Christianity, always very modest, made her own clothes. So as she traveled, she was just supporting Frank. Well, one day, one of the guys who was performing with Frank got sick and couldn't perform, and he needed somebody else to help do stuff. So he says, I know you can shoot. Come help me. So he calls Annie up. The crowd loved Annie so much that as they traveled, they began begging to see Annie, and they didn't want to see Frank anymore. Now, Frank was smart enough, right? Like, he was a smart enough business guy. He's like, all right, well, if we're going to make money doing this, let's do it. So Frank makes her the star of the show. Buffalo Bill, when he starts his Wild West, finds out about Annie, says, hey, we need you to shoot. She travels with Buffalo Bill's Wild West performing tricks. Of the tricks that she performed, she would do things riding on a horse where she would have people hold up a playing card or whatever it was, right, a cigarette, off of a moving horse. And she would do some things off a bicycle too, but off a moving horse, she could stand up on the horse, have somebody hold a playing card up in the middle of the arena and shoot the middle out of a playing card standing up on the back of a horse. I would just like to know how the conversation went the first time she tried to talk somebody into that, right? Like, no, really, it'll be fine. Just hold it up. She was an amazing performer. One of the things that was said about her is that people would stand 10 yards away from her, throw dimes in the air, and she could shoot the dimes out of the air. Well, during her exhibition with Buffalo Bill's Wild West, this is one of the coins she shot out. This is when the Wild West was over in Europe. They had several months. They performed before the Queen. This coin used to have the Queen's face on it. Performing before the Queen, she would do some of these trick shots. This is one of those coins. Well, in the midst of their shooting, and I can hand this around, just, it's not a souvenir, so we need it back. So, during their exhibitions, Frank, before there was clay pigeons, okay, or skeets, they used these little glass balls. And her husband, Frank, would throw these up in the air. At one point, he threw up 1,000 of these, of which Annie shot, I think it was like 972 or something like that. Now, what's significant is she didn't use a shotgun. She used a pistol or a rifle. Here is a picture of her using a pistol shooting these out of the air. And she could do it with her left hand or her right hand. And they did have what was kind of like a skeet thrower, but it threw these in the air. During one of their exhibitions, and here's what that looked like. During one of the exhibitions, Frank said he threw 5,000 of these, of which Annie shot 4,772.
Wow.
With a rifle, right? With like a 22 pistol, with a 22 rifle, with a 38 pistol. I mean, this is remarkable. She really was a very impressive shot. Well, as she traveled to these exhibitions, one of the guys who wrote for Buffalo Bill's Wild West wrote that he remembers every single night Annie would be sitting in her tent reading from her pocket New Testament, which she never went anywhere without. At the end of her life, she had, the doctors really weren't sure what it was. They thought it was some kind of disease, some kind of blood disorder. And word was spreading that Annie's sick and she might not make it. Well, there was a cowboy who wrote her a letter actually up there. The Garsh Museum in Ohio has the largest collection of Annie Oakley documents and artifacts. They have this actual letter, which is amazing. But this cowboy wrote her and said, I know you're really sick and you mean so much to America. If there's anything we can do, he says, if you need a blood transfusion, I'll give you all my blood. We want you to be okay. I mean, like, really sweet letter. She wrote him a letter back and said, thank you so much for your concern, but I'm trusting in God, and when it's my time to go, he's going to take me, and I won't go before it's my time. So thank you, but I'm just trusting in God on this. Now, I mean, right, really amazing answer. Well, her life was defined by modesty, was defined by faith, and she was one of the very first feminists in American history. Now, it's kind of funny, feminists don't like her today for two reasons. One of them is Annie Oakley said, well, that's the second one I'm going to get to, but one reason, she said that I don't think women should vote. She says, because I know too many women who are emotional and I don't trust them to make a good decision. So that's one thing they don't like. The second thing, she says, what makes men and women equal, she said, is the gun. She said, when every woman can handle a gun as naturally as they can handle a baby, then men and women will be equal. Now, I understand you might not like the sentiment, but I kind of really appreciate what she's saying.
Absolutely.
Right? In a culture of, right, sexual assault, domestic violence, I got a really good idea for how to solve all those problems. Right? Let's train every woman how to use a handgun and get every woman a handgun. I think we resolve a lot of those problems real fast. Well, she started a school for women, and the thing the school taught was actually firearms. Number one thing they taught, when the Spanish-American War broke out, she wrote the federal government and said, if y'all need any help with the problems you're dealing with, I have women who are expert marksmen who can shoot anybody that needs to be shot. If you need help, let us know. Federal government wrote her back, said, we're not really ready to have women in combat yet, thank you. When World War I broke out, she again wrote the federal government and said, we have women that are ready. She personally trained more than 10,000 women. Wow. She wrote in World War I, she said, we have women who are ready to go, again, like shoot whoever needs to be shot. We can write long distance, no problem. If you want this thing over, send us out, we'll take care of it. It's kind of what she says. They write her back saying, you know what, thank you so much, we appreciate it. We're not ready to have women in combat. She then volunteers and says, well, if you need any instructors, I'm happy to come teach the men how to shoot. Right? Like, Annie Oakley was remarkable her whole life, but here's the thing. There's a lot of names, even in history, that we recognize the names and we don't know their stories.
Right.
The more stories we start to learn, the more we recognize that so many of the heroes of our history were people who knew who God was, right, who recognized God in their life and did some really amazing things. And we can go through a slew of this. I'm going to show you one more, and then we need to keep moving because we're really tight on time. One of the guys who fought in the Civil War, his name was John Clem. He fought in the Battle of Chickamauga, where he came to notoriety because he was promoted to sergeant after that battle. There's actually a newspaper we have. The newspaper says that John Clem from the Army of the Cumberland was promoted for bravery by General Rosecrans to sergeant has been further promoted by General Thomas to lieutenant and placed on his staff as a lieutenant. The newspaper explains why that was impressive. They say because he is but 12 years old. This is 12-year-old John Clem. If you notice, in one of these pictures, the gun is leaning sideways, and it is still taller than he is. There are records that they had to cut one of the muskets roughly in half just so he could be able to hold it and fire it. Okay? Here's what's crazy, though. Not only that you have a 12-year-old in battle, but you have a 12-year-old who got promoted. So what did they think about 12-year-olds? Clearly something different than what we think about 12-year-olds.
Right.
But, even if you go back, world history, right? Think about the Bible. In Hebrew culture, when do you become a man?
12.
Okay, at 13 is where the bar mitzvah is, right? But 12 o'clock, you're right there on the verge of that. 12 o'clock, wow, 12 years old. Apparently I'm hungry, I don't know. So, 12 years old, you are on the verge, right, of manhood. And this is what's interesting, is we used to judge people much more by their behavior than by their age. Yeah. And so right here beside us, this is an education section we have set up. These are all desks from the 1860s to 1940s. So when you hear talk about a one-room schoolhouse, this is how they were laid out. They were very small rooms. That is an actual little fireplace from a school from back in the 1860s. And the reason you needed a fireplace, in early America, school lasted for roughly 3 months. What 3 months would you go to school and why? Winter. And why in winter?
So they can farm the rest of the year.
Because every spring you got to help plant the crops, right? Every summer you're working on the farm. Every fall you're harvesting the crops. So winter is when you would go to school. So they would generally go to school for roughly 3 months. And here's what's a lot different for us than for them. And there's we can point to a lot of progressive changes in education. But one of the things that to me is the most interesting, one of the most significant changes, is it used to be in education, we did not have grades, we had levels. Okay? Grades and levels are very different. The easiest way that I know to describe it is if you've ever played a video game, right? I don't know, like maybe your family's not allowed to. I don't know, okay? Your kids couldn't do that. If you've ever seen a video game, you cannot go to level 2 until you've passed level 1. But it does not matter how old you are. When you start the game, you start at level 1. Okay? This is the way it was. But you went to the next level based on content mastery, not based on age, right? Just how well have you mastered the content? Well, level 1, every level 1 student started off with a little horn book and a New England primer. Now, the horn book, very simply, just has the Lord's Prayer and then the alphabet below it. So you had to memorize the Lord's Prayer and then the alphabet, and then you had a New England primer. The New England primer was first done in 1690. It was then used all the way up to the 1930s. As you go through the New England primer, and if you guys have seen presentations that we do before, you probably have seen us talk about this at some point. But in this New England primer, as it starts off, the very first section so it shows some words of 1 syllable, 2, 3, 4, 5 syllables to give you an idea of syllables and how it works. Well, then it comes to the first section as a lesson for children. Now, the lesson for children, can you read those or is that a little small for you?
Hang on.
No insult intended. Okay.
Pray to God, love God, fear God, serve God, take not God's name in vain, and so forth.
Okay. Now, the last couple are really humorous to me because the last couple, it says, mind your book, which was the Bible, strive to learn, what's the last one?
Do not.
Oh, that's B.
Oh, be not a dunce.
Be not a dunce. Don't be dumb. Right? This is one of the most important lessons we can help kids learn at an early age. Right? Don't be dumb. Don't be dumb. Okay?
That's pretty good.
There then is a picture alphabet. Now, I'm going to hand this around. This is the book I'm going to hand around in a second. On these books, the binding on this is already torn. And so as you hold this book, we generally want to keep it no more than about 45 degrees open. And these pages do get old and sometimes can be brittle, so be very careful going through it. We actually have reprints of this very one. So if you guys have bought a primer from us, you bought the reprint of this one. Okay? So it's a very cool book, but it has an alphabet of lessons, or excuse me, first one is a picture alphabet, where it has the alphabet on one side, pictures on the other. Every single lesson, every single picture is from the Bible as it goes through. At the very end of the first picture alphabet, there is a second section. The second section is the very first question and answer section in the New England Primer. Okay? The first question in the New England Primer, who was the first man?
Adam.
Who was the first woman?
Eve.
Who was the first murderer?
Cain.
Now, this one might be tricky. It's not supposed to be. Who was the first martyr, not Christian martyr? Who was the first one that was killed? Abel. Who was the first translated? He walked with God and was no more because God took him. Enoch. Who was the oldest man? Who built the ark? Who was the patientest man?
Job.
Job. Who was the meekest man?
Moses.
Now, he wrote it about himself, which seems weird, but that's what it says. Who led Israel into Canaan?
Joshua.
Who was the strongest man?
Samson.
Who killed Goliath?
David.
Who was the wisest man?
Solomon.
Who was in the whale's belly?
Jonah.
Who saves lost men?
Jesus.
Who is Jesus Christ?
God.
The Son of God.
God.
Who was the mother of Christ?
Mary.
Who betrayed his master?
Judas.
Who denied his master? Who was the first Christian martyr?
Stephen.
Who was the chief apostle of the Gentiles?
Paul.
That is the very first question and answer section in the New England Primer. As you go to the back of the New England Primer, it has what is known as Westminster's Shorter Catechism. That is 100+ questions on faith and theology. In order for you to go to level 2, you had to be able to pass level 1, which meant you had to answer the questions. Your teacher might pick 20 questions, and you don't know which question she's going to pick, so you have to learn it all. The foundation of education in America was built on Christianity. Now, there was a lot more we added to it as we went along, but you couldn't go to level 2 if you hadn't passed level 1. So even if you didn't believe in Jesus, you at least knew who he was. You knew what the Bible was about. As you keep going, there are some remarkable things. We don't have time to go through much of it. I'm going to show you 2 things, and we're moving to the next section. This is an elementary spelling book. Okay? The fact that it is elementary becomes significant.
Yes.
Because this is 3rd and 4th grade. Is there anybody who was an English major in college? Or did stuff with English? Okay, your hand moved and I got nervous for you. Oh yeah, we got one. Okay. So, or if anybody was an educator, this would be relevant too. Okay? I did fairly well in the SAT, the ACT. I did fairly well in college. I actually did some grad school work. I don't consider myself to be a dumb person. I don't know how to pronounce some of these words. And this is for 3rd and 4th grade. And I always hold it where somebody can see me that way. They know I'm not making this up. But, okay, so this is from this lesson. So some of the words, there is subterraneous, succedaneous, simultaneous, instantaneous, homogeneous, contumelious, eremonious, I'm not sure, parsimonious, deleterious, meritorious, disobedient. So I know a few of the words. This is for 3rd and 4th grade.
Wow. Wow.
Okay? At the end of this 3rd and 4th grade book, they have a section on fables. Now, I'm going to hand this to somebody to read. This is another one where the binding is very, very poor. But the fable section is where you would take the words that you had learned, and now we're going to apply them. So, who would like to read the very first fable in the spelling book? I need a volunteer. Okay, perfect. Okay. All right, did you volunteer? Because you can have the next one. Okay, so this is the title.
Okay, of the boy who stole apples.
Do you want to hold it? I'm happy to hold it, but you can if you want to.
Okay, you want me to read that?
Yes.
An old man found a rude boy upon one of his trees stealing apples and desired him to come down. But the young saucebox told him plainly he would not. Won't you, said the old man, then I will fetch you down. So he pulled up some turf or grass and threw at him. But this only made the youngster laugh to think that the old man should pretend to beat him down from the tree with grass only. Well, well, said the old man, if neither words nor grass will do, I must try what virtue there is in the stones. So the old man pelted him heartily with stones, which soon made the young chap haste down from the tree and beg the old man's pardon. The moral, If good words and gentle means will not reclaim the wicked, they must be dealt with in a more severe manner.
First thing I know.
I like that one.
Now, let me remind you, in modern education, we're telling students that you need to do whatever you think is right. Where now, truth has become relative and subjective, right? It used to be, nope, there is some truth, and there are consequences for actions, and if you don't do the right thing, you're not going to like the results. And the old man was not considered to be a bad guy for stoning a child. Right? Now, with it being said, right, the kid was stealing, and the gentleman was polite, and he was kind, and he didn't listen. And so the moral is, look, we want you to know, there will be severe consequences if you don't do the right thing and you don't learn when you're asked. Now, again, there's so many things, so fun we can go through. Two things I want to show you. This is what was known as a storoscope. This is a scroll with pictures. We have dozens of them. Some of them are over on display right over there. But the idea was, on every picture, there was a story. So you just go through this whole scroll and you tell the story from every single picture. And then, so there could be a scroll from the Civil War, there could be a scroll from the Revolution, there could, right, whatever time period, but there was some sequence of stories, and you had to learn the stories. The teacher would tell the stories, the teacher would then hand you the scroll and say, now it's your turn, you tell the stories. Here's what's amazing about this. We used to know the story of America because we learned the stories of America. Today, we don't know the stories, and let me just point out why this is so silly. Think about the Bible, okay? If we did the Bible like we do modern-day history, let me ask you a modern-day history question from the Bible. In what year did David kill Goliath? Do you know why you don't know? Because the Bible doesn't say. Do you know why the Bible doesn't say? Because it's not the point of the story. What we've done is we have emphasized the insignificant and we've lost the significant, right? And this is where so much has been lost, including, so this is a PE book, which I'm a sports junkie, so this is awesome to me. This was used in public schools in the 1970s. One of the things we taught every public school student in the 1970s, this is a course on riflery.
That's right.
Okay? Now, I will point out, at a time when we actually had guns in school and were teaching students how to use guns in school, there were no mass school shootings. In the midst of this, okay? So it teaches you the parts of a gun. It teaches you how different kinds of targets, how to score targets, what that looks like. It teaches you the different positions that you can use in holding a firearm and shooting the firearm. But let me back you up. Right here in the top left, that is a target. Do you know where the target is?
That's where we keep ours.
Oh, so in a house, in a fireplace? Absolutely. So no, but this is at school. This was in the school gymnasium. Okay? And here's what it says. There are special plans that make it possible to use rooms like gymnasiums, school cafeterias, and auditoriums as part-time ranges without interfering with the regular use of the room. Figure 1 shows a simple backstop, easily constructed and satisfactory for a .22 caliber rifle. In school. Okay. Well, and here's my favorite part. Plans for more elaborate indoor ranges or part-time ranges may be obtained on request to the National Rifle Association. We were telling kids to go to the NRA, but again, what's interesting is right now, education has changed so much, and we could spend hours talking about just education, looking at what we used to do and how different it is than today. I don't think y'all need to be convinced of this other than you would be impressed to see how much rich history there was. Yeah. And there's a reason that we did more in 3 months in early America than we're able to accomplish in all the years and the extended months and now you have presidential candidates who are saying, hey, let's add some extra hours on to every school day. You can add all the extra hours you want. As long as you have the wrong philosophy and you're following through with the wrong ideas, it's not going to solve the problems you think you're trying to solve. And this is where early education looked very, very different. We do have a ton of this stuff on the website if you guys want to know more, but we got to keep moving because we're already behind.